I'm Jack Easthope, reg number 196363. Today I will be taking you through some examples of differences between a lack of skill and a lack of capacity within exercises executed in the weights room. The first example will be of an athlete displaying a lack of skill during his squat. As you'll see, he's unable to keep a full foot contact throughout the movement, unable to load his heel during his descent, and coming too far forward on his forefoot during his ascent. This also leads to the athlete working distally to proximally during his flexion and extension pattern. The second example presents an athlete with a lack of capacity during his squat. You'll see he excessively leans forward during the movement, unable to keep a neutral spine. Example 3 shows another lack of skill, although this time during a deadlift rather than a squat. The athlete presents a faulty movement pattern during the hip hinge as she descends, lowering the bar to the floor. This results in a displacement of the bar path shifting too far forward. The final example shows lack of capacities of an athlete during his deadlift. You'll see the lack of capacity in relation to flexibility of his hamstring is leading to a lack of capacity and strength of his glutes. As he tries to sit into the deadlift, he can't help but overload his lower back and hamstring muscles. Here you can see the athlete is performing a back squat. As he initiates his movement, he flexes his knees before his hips. This causes him to lose heel contact on his descent. From a posterior view, you can see that the inability to load the heel on the descent also leads to excessive pronation of the ankles, more present here on the right foot. To help improve this lack of skill, we had the athlete execute a kettlebell goblet box squat. Having the box as an external cue helped the athlete sit back, loading his hips before his knees. It also enabled the athlete to keep a full foot contact, loading his heel on descent and not come forward onto the forefoot during his ascent. We also used a barbell lever squat as an exercise intervention to help the athlete improve the coordination of the hips, knees and ankles, working proximally to distally. It also helped the athlete keep a full foot contact, sitting back so he could load the heels rather than the forefoot. After implementing these changes into a training program, once returning to the back squat, you could see the athlete found it much easier to keep a full foot contact loading the heels on his descent. It also improved the skill of his squat pattern in relation to flexion from the hips, knees and ankles, working proximally to distally. Here you can see athlete B executing a back squat. At the bottom of his squat, his projection of centre of mass is well outside of his base of support. As he comes up, you can see he uses his spine to lift the bar rather than his legs. On his descent, you can see he flexes from the front of the hip rather than distributing the weight through his centre. This shows a lack of capacity in hip mobility and gluteal strength. You can also see here that the athlete is keeping his head down and eyes fixed on the floor, also contributing to the forward lean. From a posterior view, as the athlete descends, you can see he takes a bias to his right hand side. This overloading of the right side of the pelvis is due to a lack of capacity in spinal stability, due to overloading of the anterior hip capsule, like you saw from a lateral view a moment ago. To help rectify this, we used some self-myofascial release on the hip flexor muscles to inhibit. We then used a 90-90 hip stretch using a pendulum and front raise to lengthen and stretch the tissues. After inhibiting and stretching the hip flexor complex, we moved on to activating and strengthening the erector complex. We used a series of Superman exercises, starting on the floor, progressing to an isometric and then a dynamic banded variation. After increasing hip mobility and strengthening the spinal erectors, we integrated these changes with a dumbbell goblet box squat. This helped the athlete improve his balance, and using a visual cue helped him stay more upright. Once we returned to the back squat, you could see the athlete's hip mobility had improved due to his center of mass now moving forward. His spinal stability had improved, and through the use of a visual cue, the forward lean had decreased massively. This also meant as the athlete ascended, he was more upright. The increased capacity of spinal strength also meant when the athlete descended, he was managed to maintain center, getting rid of the bias to the right. Through increasing the capacity of hip mobility and spinal strength, you can see the degree of change in the torso position. The visual cue was a reminder to continue to improve skill even when capacity issues exist. Here, as the athlete descends during her deadlift, you can see she loses the bar path due to a lack of skill. Rather than continuing to hinge with the hips, she lowers the weight with her upper body, causing her to lean forward more. To enhance this skill, a simple drill was used. By using a wall as an external cue, I asked the athlete to continually push her hips back until she felt contact with the wall. As you can see here, as the athlete continues to hinge, pushing the weight through her hips, you can see the bar path remains vertical with a slight displacement at the end. As athlete 4 executes his deadlift, you can see a lack of capacity in gluteal strength, meaning he can't sit back into his hips, forcing him to load his lower back and hamstrings. We used a split squat as the R phase of a phasic ramp warm-up. For the A phase, we use an active straight leg raise, trying to activate the quadriceps and stretch the hamstrings and lower back at the same time. This highlighted the lack of flexibility in his hamstrings, as you can see from the degree shown in the image. To help with this, the mobilized phase was a hamstring stretch, trying to increase the length of his tissues. As you can see here, over a 4-week phase, the range of motion of an active straight leg raise made great improvements. Starting out at 68 degrees, the range of motion now at 86 degrees made an improvement of 18 degrees. The final phase of the warm-up, the potentiation phase, was a glute bridge to help strengthen the glute muscles. It will also prepare them for the deadlift exercise too. As you can see here, the athlete's setup position has improved drastically. As he pushes his feet through the floor, he can sit into his hips, helping him load his glutes. By following the ramp warm-up basically over 4 weeks, you can see the lack of capacity and hamstring flexibility has improved. The setup position sitting into his hips also indicates an increased capacity in gluteal strength. Combined, this has improved the athlete's setup position, increasing his spinal alignment by 8 degrees. From today's examples, firstly in relation to skill, you can see most interventions were made through exercise prescription, coaching cues, and continued practice. As you saw from the lack of skill during the squat in example 1, as one skill improved, other skills improved. In relation to the examples used today for lack of capacity, interventions made to enhance mobility, increase stability and strength were paramount to help improve the faulty movement patterns. One interesting factor was, even when working on lack of capacity, it's important to remember that interventions must be made to continue to improve skill to enhance the movement as a whole. Another interesting occurrence I came across while working on this topic was when there are issues of capacity, even with the right exercise interventions and coaching cues and good practice, sometimes the skill can't be enhanced, which would mean capacity issues would have to be resolved first before looking at a skill issue alone. The last 2 slides are some references for some of the research papers that I found in relation to the interventions I made to help improve the skills and capacities of the athletes.